You're listening to the Doc Lounge podcast. This is a place for candid conversations with healthcare industry's top physicians, executives, and thought leaders. This podcast is made possible by Pacific Companies, your trusted advisor in physician recruitment. I am your host, Summer Gilbert, and I am the Director of Marketing and Branding here at Pacific Companies. And sitting next to me today is my co-host, Pacific Companies COO, John Polk. Thanks for being here, John.
Sure thing, Summer.
Today on the podcast, we're talking to Dr. Carole Lieberman. Dr. Leiberman is a board-certified psychiatrist. She specializes in media psychiatry, forensic psychiatry. She also works as an expert witness and is an author of multiple books. So we are very, very excited to have Dr. Leiberman on the podcast today. Just to learn more about what she does and all the interesting cases that she's had. So let's get started. And just a quick reminder, this podcast is intended to be an open forum. Any personal beliefs, views, or opinions represented in this episode are that of our guest and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Pacific Companies. So please have an open mind and remember that this podcast is not a news source, but rather a safe and neutral platform for candid conversations.
Good morning. We are on the line right now with Dr. Carole Lieberman, board-certified psychiatrist here at Doc Lounge. And Dr. Lieberman, tell us about your work and what you do.
Sure. Thank you for having me on. When I was deciding to go to medical school, which actually began when I was 8 years old, and I read a book about Elizabeth Blackwell, the first woman physician in America. And then as a teen read Freud's interpretation of dreams, which sent me on the road to becoming a psychiatrist. But before I actually, right at the time, during the time period when it came time to apply to medical school, in college, in other words, I took a trip to Chicago to the AMA offices. And because I wanted to know whether committing myself to being a doctor meant that 24/7 or, 5 days a week, I would need to see patients, that would be the only thing that I could do. And I met with someone there who described to me, that, being a doctor can be, and seeing patients can be certainly part of it, but there really are a lot of other things that you can do with that degree, with that knowledge and experience and so on. So with that, I continued on my path to medical school, and I have, in fact, carried that idea out, sort of an eclectic plan, which is, of course, I do see patients, but I also do a number of other things, such as being what I call my day job is being a forensic psychiatrist and expert witness. And so I travel around all over the country, really, doing cases, serving as an expert witness in civil and criminal cases. And then I also wanted to be an author. That was one of the things that, do I have to choose this or this? And so I am a published author of 4 books. Some bestsellers, some award winners, and what else? I also another thing I wanted to do on my way to medical school that I was planning, and I do, is to appear on television and radio and all kinds of media to talk about different issues that people are facing. It was because I wanted to share my knowledge about mental health issues, but really insights into how people's emotions work. I wanted to share it with more than just the patients that I would ever be able to see in a lifetime. So that's why a large part of what I do, is speaking and the books and being on television and radio. To talk about these things.
That's a fascinating assortment of responsibilities as well as activities and accomplishments. Is this your first podcast?
No. I actually have a podcast of my own, which, let me step back a minute. A lot of times before 9/11, what I would talk about in the media, of course, was my first two books, which were relationship books: Bad Boys, Why We Love Them, How to Live with Them, and When to Leave Them, and Bad Girls, which actually Bad Girls, Why Men Love Them, and How Good Girls Can Learn Their Secrets. When 9/11 happened, since I am a New Yorker, even though I am currently living in California, it changed everything. And I asked myself what I could do and what I should do as a psychiatrist to help people cope with what is the most traumatic experience that we will all have. We're continuing to have, because it's the ongoing threat, even after 9/11, of course. And so that is when I decided to give myself another name. Before it was media psychiatrist, which still holds true. But I then started calling myself the terrorist therapist, and have written 2 books about terrorism, Coping with Terrorism, Dreams Interrupted. And my latest one, which I really feel passionate about, is Lions and Tigers and Terrorists, Oh My, How to Protect Your Child in a Time of Terror. So it's for children. It's for parents and teachers, and for children. The picture book part of it is for children. And so I get really, I get caught up in these passions. I mean, 9/11, of course, has been an ongoing passion now for almost 20 years. And before that, one of my passions, and the reason why I moved to California, was after my residency at Bellevue, was to help the entertainment industry portray mental illness, not portray violence, not have gratuitous violence. And I wanted to come here and explain to people, which has turned out to be a more difficult challenge than I had envisioned, but I have made inroads, explain to people the impact of gratuitous violence in television, movies, video games, to try to get people to realize how it is making the world, and in fact it has been, we see the proof now, more violent.
Yeah. For our listeners who may not know what media psychiatry is, can you define that for us?
Sure. What it is basically what I've been discussing, that using the media, using television and radio and all media, print and internet, to convey ideas and insights about various issues that people are facing in their life, and helping them with that.
You bring this up, it sounds as though that you have a great deal of passion in reference to violence and terrorism and things of this nature, and that's certainly understandable, and I applaud your work for that. I'm curious, what is your take on the cause of all of the mass shootings? I mean, I'm interested in your opinion on that. As a media psychiatrist, as a psychiatrist, and given your body of work, is it mental health? Is it the availability of guns? Is it something else?
Well, mental health is definitely an underlying part of it. Now that, has gotten to be sort of a controversial thing. What's really been interesting and alarming at the same time is some things that we have taken for granted as psychiatrists. The whole world has sort of gone crazy in a sense in questioning certain things that really psychiatry explains is a certain way, and people want to believe it's another way. But in any case, and so this is an example of it. When apparently, I've been talking about in the media, and in books and so on, talking about how mental illness, psychological problems are related, are at the bottom, at underpinnings of mass shooters and other kinds of problems. And nowadays, it is so, everybody is so ready to jump on everybody's neck, back, something, whatever that expression is. Now, it's so politically incorrect, apparently, to say mental illness altogether. And the problem is, it's semantics. The problem is that when I say that people who perpetrate these mass shootings are mentally ill or have mental problems, in various ways, that same statement, I don't mean necessarily that all of them are, which they weren't, not all of them are psychotic, not all of them are schizophrenic or manic depressive. And yet, there's this tendency to sort of jump on that and say, no, they're not mentally ill. Well, there's a lot of different ways of being mentally ill, and certainly all of them have had childhood problems. They have all had either they've been abused, they've been neglected, they've been the result of divorce that has left scars on them. They have been bullied, various things in traumas in childhood that then give them the time to absorb themselves in video games and other violent media, and have their anger, their rage stoked by that, given a direction by that, until finally something tips it off, and they perpetrate a mass shooting. Whether it's a girlfriend breaking up with them or some current problem that then causes the volcano to erupt.
It's a terrible thing, and I based on what I understand, I certainly would concur with your assessment. Underlying mental health issues through childhood and ongoing, but it is a terrible thing. I really want to know what your take is on the current healthcare crisis. Beyond just that, there's a tremendous amount of depression. It seems as though addiction is so prevalent now, and couple that with the shortage of healthcare providers, particularly in the area of mental health. Your thoughts?
We are really heading towards we're on a downward spiral. One of the biggest problems is not only that there's a shortage of psychiatrists, but actually this kind of goes together. Psychiatrists, when I trained to be a psychiatrist, I'm talking primarily about my residency at Bellevue, which was the #1 place in the world to be trained in psychiatry because you see everything. The worst cases are sent to the emergency room at Bellevue, and then also, of course, there's NYU where you see the worried well. But anyhow, when I was trained, and also trained by the New York Psychoanalytic Institute supervisors from there, also I went to London to train with Anna Freud. Psychiatrists did therapy. They weren't all psychoanalysts. I'm not saying that, but many of them, if not most, did psychoanalytically oriented psychotherapy, or at least had the knowledge of that, whatever kind of therapy they actually practiced. They understood the workings of the mind. Mm-hmm. And nowadays, psychiatrists have been reduced to pill pushers. They see patients for med visits, and which are like usually between 15 and 20 minutes, sometimes could be half an hour, and that's once a month or once every 2 or 3 months. Now, it's no wonder that someone doesn't get well, whatever their problem is. It's no wonder that they don't get well when all they're getting is med visits. Medicine, although it's very necessary in certain kinds of illnesses and problems and so on, it is not the cure. The only way to cure, so to speak, or get to the bottom of or improve a person's mental health is through psychotherapy. It doesn't have to be psychoanalytic. I'm not saying everybody has to lay on a couch for 5 years, but certainly you need a psychiatrist who understands how the mind works in that way, and who sees the person for therapy, talks to them about their childhood, about the things that are going on currently, which of course the problems have roots in their childhood. And they're not getting that. And all that's happening, and I know this particularly well because in my capacity as a forensic psychiatrist, where there are lawsuits, like after someone commits suicide and serves the doctor with malpractice, or someone shoots someone, or other kinds of problems. So what happens is when the patient goes back to the psychiatrist after a month or 2 months or 3 months and all they've had are med visits, the psychiatrist just piles on, oh, you're not feeling better? Okay, I'll add this. And they wind up coming away, with 3 and 4 and 5 different kinds of medications and not any better.
Yeah.
And so yes, society is getting more complicated. Terrorism is certainly part of it. You were saying about, drug abuse and all that. A lot of these things have happened since 9/11. I have been tracking these things, and a lot of this self-harm, a lot of, people, the obesity epidemic is like an easy way to see, and that's happened since 9/11. People are trying to stuff themselves, to comfort themselves, and same thing with drugs and alcohol. And yet at the same time, when they go to get treatment, what do they get? First, there's this lack of psychiatrists altogether, and then they don't get therapy. They get some prescription thrown at them.
Yeah, just masking their feelings.
If you were in charge for a year, and it would take probably longer than that to resolve this issue, what's the solution? Do you have? I've certainly worked with a number of psychiatrists in my capacity as a physician recruiter over the years, and psychopharmacology is, in fact, the norm, as I understand it, the pill pushers. And what's the solution here? Insurance companies paying differently, reimbursing differently?
That's it. That's what started this all. Most people did not go to medical school and psychiatry residency to be pill pushers. Some people did, like in my graduating class, for psych residency. Yes, there were some people who were interested in psychopharmacology all along, and that's what they did. But most psychiatrists didn't want to do that. They wanted to talk to patients. And the solution, and it all came apart when insurance companies woke up one day and said to themselves, it would be a lot cheaper if we paid a social worker or a psychologist or a marriage and family therapist, all of which have much less training than psychiatrists and who therefore charge less. We would save a lot of money if we only paid those people to do therapy and we just paid psychiatrists to give prescriptions. And that's what changed everything. And that was, so yes, one thing that could be better would be for a psychiatrist for insurance companies to pay psychiatrists enough to be able to do therapy. But at this point, it has to start back in the residency programs because there has to be more training again in doing therapy. And also, even before that, there needs to be a way of letting people know, sort of a public information campaign, letting people know if they're thinking of going into medicine that you can actually spend time talking to patients as a psychiatrist. Even regular doctors, family doctors don't get to talk to patients much these days either. It does come down to money and insurance and all of that. The other thing that I would do if I were in charge of, if I was had a job as America's psychiatrist, as I like to call myself, is to reopen the state mental hospitals, because it is since they closed and the county hospitals and the mainly state mental hospitals, large mental hospitals, reopened them, and not so that they could be like Cuckoo's Nest, but so that they can help people. And I think nowadays we would be able to help them a lot more than back in the Cuckoo's Nest day. And that would take a large percentage of the homeless off the street and get them help.
It does seem that since that era, it may have been under the Reagan administration, that the pendulum has swung a little too far in one direction, where it becomes very difficult to get a wellness check on somebody who's in crisis. I know this from personal experience, loved ones, that it can be very difficult to intervene. and we lost the ability to bring people into the system for care. I guess because we were worried about violating their personal rights.
Yes, when I moved from New York to California, and I was working, I was admitting patients, my private patients. Some of them had to be admitted to a hospital, so I was admitting them, and I got on the role of the faculty at Cedars, and I was also on the faculty at UCLA. And when people came to the emergency room and they needed to be admitted, it was so much harder to find another psychiatrist. I mean, there used to be this, presumably there still is, it's just that it's not, many psychiatrists, I found when I got here, were afraid to put their name down on a 2PC, 2-physician certificate. They didn't want to be the one or the one of two to commit a person because they were afraid that the person would then sue them later on for if they didn't want to be in the hospital, if you were hospitalizing them against their will. Psychiatrists all of a sudden were very squeamish about that. Where I came from, at Bellevue, there used to be a saying, we would admit them 1, 2, 3. We weren't afraid to do the right thing. And there was a saying that if, amongst residents, that if you were crazy enough, to want to, this is people who wanted to get into Bellevue. Sometimes there were people who were homeless or who, had various problems, and they came to the emergency room and they wanted to get in. And so we used to say, if you're crazy enough to want, and I'm being, facetious in using the word crazy. I don't want to offend anybody. But if you're crazy enough to come to the Bellevue ER and want to get in, then you do need to be hospitalized and helped.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. I'm sitting here just excited to ask you about one of your more interesting, fascinating experiences in your expert witness testimony or some of the more celebrated cases that you've been involved in. Is there something that you can share with us?
Sure. Well, I've been involved in a lot of different high-profile cases. I like that because there's not only the challenge of winning the case, but of being questioned about it in the media and not saying too much and finding the proper line and so on. I think even though I've been involved in a lot of high-profile cases, still the one that's most dear to my heart was one of the early ones that I did. I was just starting as an expert witness, and I became the defense psychiatrist for Jonathan Schmitz, who was the man. We called it was the Jenny Jones murder trial, and this was a case where Jenny Jones, for those people who don't remember Jenny Jones, she was a talk show host, and I had been on her show a number of times. But talk show hosts talk shows and now reality shows do kind of fly fast and loose. And she had this show which she told guests, people who she wanted to have on as guests, she told them it was called a secret crush show. But it was really planned to be same-sex secret crush. So of course, it was to embarrass people who would be surprised, ambushed on the show by someone who had a same-sex secret crush on them, and for those people who didn't want the implication that they were gay, that would be very devastating. So they contacted Jonathan Schmitz. They told him that somebody had a secret crush on him. He thought it was his fiancée who had broken up with him. He was hoping it was she, or he thought it might be these other girls at work and so on. He never even heard of Jenny Jones. So he came on the show, and sure enough, there was this guy who he had met through this woman who was his friend, and It's a whole long story. I'll shorten it. So he was very shocked when he came on. And it turned out that, of course they don't ask these kinds of questions. Well, since this happened, it did make a change in some talk shows and reality shows where they're a little more careful in screening. They at least make you sign something that you can't sue them. But anyway, so he came on. He was shocked to see the guy and the girlfriend. And they didn't ask him before having him on whether he had any mental health problems. And it turned out that he was bipolar, and he had made several suicide attempts before, which of course would have been or should have been a no-no to have him on a show like this, to ambush him. And so there he was on, and after the show, after the 3 days after the show, he went to Scott Amador was the person who had the same-sex secret crush. And 3 days after the show, John went to Scott's house and tried to get him to stop following him, to stop pursuing him. And Scott just smirked at him. And John had brought a gun with him because he and his father and so on used to hunt, and he brought a gun with him, and it was he bought the gun originally to kill himself because he was, and the media put it out as he was homophobic, and this was a gay hate crime. It was nothing of the kind. John wasn't homophobic. He worked as a waiter, and a lot of in high-end places, and a lot of the other waiters were gay. He didn't have a problem with that. In fact, he had told this guy he said, I'll be your friend. This was before being on the show. I'll be your friend, but I'm not into this. But John knew that his father and his family were very homophobic. And he was afraid that if his family saw him on this show, because they already, saw that he didn't want to go into the military, and he didn't really he only hunted because that was the time he could be with his father without being abused. And so he knew that his family would assume that he must be gay. They had questions about it before because he wasn't, big Michigan hunting military man, and this would seal it. They would think that he was gay, and if they thought he was gay, they would have ostracized him. So that was what it was about, and he was just trying. And it's a whole other, I was on the stand for a day. And Court TV was taping this, it was live actually on Court TV, gavel to gavel. And this is, as I said, one of my first trials, certainly my first big, high profile trial. So there was a lot of pressure. But so the morning was spent with the prosecutor trying to get me disqualified, which didn't happen. I was qualified. And then the whole afternoon was explaining John's psychodynamics. In other words, it had to do with whole long story, I'll shorten it. It had to do with his father, who had been abusive. His father was a Vietnam vet, and some incidents happened, and it turned out that when John shot Scott, what in his mind, which by that point was totally dissolving, he thought he was shooting his father. So the jury got it. Talk about psychoanalytic. When I do my expert witness work, I do explain things to juries in a very, childhood on kind of thing, explaining why people do what they did, not just because they walked into a grocery store and they shot up the grocery store because they were hungry or something. You have to get to the bottom of these things, and if you explain it to a jury in, a chronological kind of way, they get it.
Mm-hmm. What a strange show theme. Wow. And another thing I'm thinking of as you're talking to me, a lot of these cases seem pretty, intense, and definitely something that you probably bring home. So for our listeners that are thinking about going into psychiatry and, may not understand just the intense stuff that you could bring home, how do you deal with it?
Yes. You can't shut yourself off from it altogether, or you won't have enough compassion for the people. But You do have to try to learn. I mean, the best way is if you feel that you have done the best that you can, like whether it's a patient that you're treating in your office or whether it's a case, if you feel at peace with yourself, knowing that you have done everything, which sometimes means quite a lot, sometimes means going over and above, then you can feel at ease with it. Like, yes, you can feel sad that someone is in a particular predicament, whether it's in their home life or in a case, and let me tell you I didn't tell you the end to the to the Jenny Jones case. The end of it was that John was accused of first-degree murder, and everybody thought it was a slam dunk. And because of my testimony, I got him second-degree murder, and he just got out on parole fairly recently. So it's those kinds of wins that kind of keep you going. And yes, in fact, I've started a book. I almost finished a book about this case because it has lots of ins and outs and interesting things that go on behind the scenes, not only in the show, but in the court.
Mm-hmm.
But you just have to be able to face yourself in the mirror and know that you have done everything, and that there are some things you can only do. I mean, I don't want to say you can only do so much, because I don't really work that way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's true, but I like to think that you can keep trying harder and trying harder.
Yeah.
Yes, that's wonderful advice. As long as your intentions are pure and you give it your best, then you have the ability to look yourself in the mirror.
Well, we're already almost out of time, but for our listeners who may want to look up any of your books, where can they see more?
Well, if people are interested in my terrorist therapist work, that would be on the website terroristtherapist.com. And my other books are on, also my basic website is drcarole.com, drcarole.com. Then, of course, I have my expert witness. I'm actually in the process of combining these things. Too many websites.
Yeah.
But my expert witness is expertwitnessforensic.psychiatrist.com.
Gotcha. Can you get any of them on Amazon or no?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. So that could be a good spot. And I'll put all the links in this episode description to make it really easy for everyone. But I just want to say thank you so much for your time today and being willing to talk to us. We really enjoyed learning more about what you do.
This has been fascinating, Dr. Leiberman, listening to you, and I hope to have the opportunity to get you back on at a future podcast. We want to wish you season's greetings and happy holidays as well.
Thank you very much to the both of you as well.
No problem. What does the rest of your day look like?
I am going to be, of course, doing, I can do a lot. One of the nice things is that some of this expert witness work, a lot of it you can do at home, reading records and so on. So I have some of that to do. Also, the one thing that I do, my forbidden pleasure, that I recommend, I guess in a way this answers, your other question, what to do when you're taking too much home. I have a forbidden pleasure of riding horses. I have a horse, and I compete on the horse, and I'm going to have a lesson today.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Happy holidays to you, too.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you to all our listeners. If you'd like to be notified when new episodes air, make sure to hit that subscribe button. And thank you to Pacific Companies. Without you guys, this podcast would not be possible. If you'd like to be a guest or for more information, go to www.pacificcompanies.com.